People say every family has a black sheep, but in mine, that role was assigned to me before I could even speak. My name is Nora Williams, and I grew up in the shadow of my two brothers, Thomas and Mason. They were the golden boys, adored by everyone, showered with opportunities, and praised for every little thing they did. I was the afterthought, the one who was always told to make do, to settle, to stop asking for more. From the outside, we looked like the perfect family. My dad was a respected doctor, my mom a successful lawyer, and my brothers were raised like royalty. They attended private schools, had tutors for every subject, and played sports with brand new equipment. I, on the other hand, went to public school, wore hand-me-down clothes, and was told that hard work was enough to get by. I still remember my 10th birthday. Thomas got a new bicycle that cost more than my mom's monthly paycheck. Mason got a video game console that every kid in our neighborhood envied. I got a math workbook and a second-hand sweater. My mom smiled and said, "Education is the best gift." Nora, even then, I knew it wasn't about education. It was about favoritism. As we grew older, the differences became even clearer. When Thomas struggled in chemistry, my parents hired the best tutor in town. When Mason wanted to join soccer, they bought him brand new gear and paid for a professional coach. When I asked to take piano lessons, my mom laughed and said, "That's too expensive, honey. Maybe next year." Next year never came. I learned to keep my wants quiet, to bury them deep inside, but that didn't stop the ache of being invisible. The only person who truly saw me was my Grandma Rose. She wasn't wealthy, but she had a heart big enough to fill the gaps my parents left. She would slip me $20 bills with a wink and whisper, "Don't tell anyone. This is just for you." She was the only reason I didn't lose myself completely. High school should have been my chance to shine. I worked hard, studied late into the night, and earned straight A's. I even won a regional art competition. My painting displayed in the city gallery for a whole month. I came home beaming, expecting at least a proud smile. Instead, my mom barely looked up from her phone and said, "That's nice, Nora. But did you hear Thomas was made captain of the debate team?" The room erupted in applause for him, while my achievement slipped into silence. It wasn't just about academics or hobbies. It was about love, about belonging, about being seen. At every family dinner, the conversations revolved around Thomas and Mason. Thomas was going to Harvard. Mason was destined for Stanford. I was told I should consider a local community college to save money, but I didn't want to settle. I wanted to prove that I was more than the forgotten daughter. So I applied to every scholarship I could find, pouring hours into essays, interviews, and forms. By some miracle, I landed a full scholarship to a state university with a strong art history program. I thought my parents would finally be proud. They only said, "Well, at least it's free." I moved into a tiny dorm room with second-hand furniture and thrift store decorations. Thomas and Mason moved into luxury apartments near their campuses, fully funded by mom and dad. They had meal plans, cars, and allowances. I worked nights at the campus library just to afford groceries. But even in that struggle, I found myself. I discovered my passion for art restoration. Every brush stroke, every faded color I brought back to life felt like reclaiming something lost. I knew it was my calling. One afternoon, during my junior year, I called home to share my excitement. A professor had recommended me for an internship at the Seattle Museum. I could barely breathe as I explained how important it was. My mom's response was chilling. "That's great, Nora. But Mason just got accepted into Stanford Law. Can you believe it?" The phone call ended with me staring at the wall, my joy stolen once again. Graduation came faster than I expected. I walked across the stage, my heart pounding, diploma in hand. In that moment, I felt free, like I had finally done something no one could take away. But at the family dinner afterward, reality crashed back in. We sat in a dull chain restaurant, the kind with sticky menus and plastic plants. My dad asked, "So, Nora, what's next?" I told him about the museum job offer, entry level but a dream start. He frowned, calculating the salary in his head and said, "Seattle's expensive. Are you sure this is wise?" Meanwhile, Thomas and Mason bragged about med school acceptances, their voices loud and confident. My parents glowed with pride. I pushed food around my plate, swallowing my disappointment. Then Grandma Rose leaned over and pressed an envelope into my hand. "This is just to help with your first apartment," she whispered, eyes soft with love. I hugged her, fighting tears. Once again, she was the only one who believed in me. Seattle was a fresh start. My apartment was small, the kind where the walls felt thin and the pipes rattled at night, but it was mine. My museum job was tedious at times, cleaning frames and logging artifacts, but I loved it. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was building something that belonged to me. And then fate introduced me to Lucas. I was at a coffee shop, buried in restoration notes, when he slid into the chair across from me. "You know you look like you're about to declare war on that notebook, right?" he teased with a grin. I looked up, startled, and met warm brown eyes that sparkled with mischief. His name was Lucas, a web designer chasing his own dreams, hustling every day just like me. He understood what it meant to fight for something no one else believed in. Before long, he became the one person who made me laugh when I wanted to cry. He believed in me in a way my family never had, and for the first time, I allowed myself to believe in love. Falling in love with Lucas felt like discovering sunlight after living in the shadows for years. He had this way of making me feel seen, like my dreams mattered, like I mattered. We spent long evenings walking by the Seattle waterfront, sharing cheap takeout and talking about everything from childhood memories to impossible ambitions. He would listen as I rambled about restoring a centuries-old painting, and then he would smile and say, "You're going to change the world one brushstroke at a time." For someone who grew up starved of validation, his words were everything. They filled cracks in me I didn't even realize were still bleeding. I began to imagine a future with him, not just as a companion but as a partner in every sense. We were two dreamers building something from nothing, and that bond was stronger than anything my family had ever given me. When Lucas proposed, it wasn't extravagant, and that made it even more perfect. We were at the small coffee shop where we had first met. He slid a simple silver ring across the table, his voice steady but his hands trembling. "Nora, will you let me be the family you've always deserved?" My eyes burned with tears as I whispered, "Yes." Planning the wedding was both exciting and terrifying. I wanted something small and personal, a celebration of love rather than a spectacle. Lucas's parents were warm and welcoming, offering to host part of the reception in their garden. They treated me like a daughter instantly, and I couldn't help but wonder what it would have been like if my own parents had ever shown me that kind of care. Inviting my family was a decision I wrestled with. Part of me wanted them there, wanted them to witness the happiness I had built without their approval. Another part of me dreaded the judgment, the backhanded comments, the way they always managed to turn my joy into something small. In the end, I sent the invitations anyway, hoping against hope they might surprise me with support. The day of the wedding was both magical and painful. My dress was simple, secondhand but altered to perfection, and I felt beautiful, in a way I had never felt before. Lucas looked at me like I was the only person in the world, and for a moment, everything else faded away. But then I saw my family arrive. My mom's eyes swept over me with disapproval. My dad's face was expressionless, and my brothers were already whispering jokes to each other. During the ceremony, I tried to block them out. I focused on Lucas's vows, on the way his voice cracked with emotion, on the warmth in his hands as he held mine. But at the reception, my fears came true. Thomas made a toast that began with congratulations but quickly spiraled into jokes about how surprised everyone must be that I had managed to find someone. Mason chimed in, laughing about how I was always the quirky one in the family. Their words stung, disguised as humor but sharp enough to cut deep. I glanced at my parents, hoping they might intervene, but they sat there smiling faintly, as if this humiliation was entertainment. For a moment, I wanted to shrink, to disappear, to let them win again. But then I felt Lucas's hand on mine, steady and grounding. He whispered, "They don't matter, not here, not today." And I realized he was right. Still, the damage lingered. Later that night, after the guests had left and the music had faded, I sat alone with the weight of it all. I asked myself why I had even invited them. Why had I given them the chance to ruin a day that was supposed to be sacred? Lucas sat beside me and said softly, "Because you still wanted their love, Nora, but you don't need it anymore." His words settled into me like truth I had been too afraid to admit. Married life with Lucas was a gift I didn't take for granted. We lived in a modest apartment, worked long hours, and scraped by on a budget that left little room for luxuries. But there was joy in the struggle because we were building it together. I would come home exhausted from the museum, and he would be waiting with takeout and a smile that made everything worth it. We dreamed aloud about a future where maybe, just maybe, my work could take me abroad, restoring pieces that had survived centuries of history. And then came the family reunion. It had been years since I had attended one, years since I had allowed myself to be in the same space where favoritism thrived. But Grandma Rose called me one evening, her voice gentle but firm. Please come, Nora, it would mean so much to me. I couldn't say no to her, not when she had been my lifeline through every storm. Lucas insisted on coming with me. He said he wouldn't let me face that battlefield alone. We drove for hours, my stomach in knots the entire way, my mind replaying every childhood slight, every dismissal, every time I had been silenced. When we finally arrived, the sight of the old family home brought back memories I had tried to bury. The gathering was already in full swing. Laughter echoed from the backyard. The smell of grilled food filled the air, and children ran across the grass. I spotted Thomas and Mason instantly, surrounded by relatives, holding court like kings. My parents stood nearby, faces glowing with pride as they introduced their sons to everyone as future doctors and lawyers. When they saw me, their smiles faltered, just for a moment, before they pasted on polite expressions. Nora, you made it, my mom said, her voice thin, as though she hadn't expected me to come. Her eyes flicked over Lucas before landing back on me with faint disapproval. My dad gave a curt nod and turned back to his conversation. It was clear that in their eyes, nothing had changed. I tried to focus on the good. I spent time with Grandma Rose, who hugged me tightly and whispered, I'm so proud of you, my darling girl. Her warmth reminded me why I had come, why some connections were still worth holding on to. But every interaction with my parents and brothers was like reopening old wounds. At one point, Mason asked loudly if I was still playing with paintbrushes while Thomas smirked. The relatives laughed politely, not realizing or not caring how much it cut me. Lucas's hand found mine under the table, his thumb brushing soothing circles across my skin. He leaned in and murmured, You don't owe them anything. I nodded, though my chest ached with the weight of it all. By the end of the night, I was drained. As we drove home, the silence between Lucas and me was heavy but not uncomfortable. Finally, I whispered, They'll never see me, will they? He glanced at me, his eyes steady, and said, No, but you don't need them to anymore, Nora. And for the first time, I believed him. Life after that reunion felt different, like something inside me had finally snapped into focus. I realized that no matter how much I tried, my parents and brothers would never give me the love and recognition I had craved all my life. They had made their choice, and I was done begging for scraps of affection. The pain of that realization was sharp, but there was freedom in it too. Lucas encouraged me to throw myself into my art, and so I did. I spent late nights in the studio, pouring every ounce of hurt and resilience into my paintings. My work began to change, gaining depth, intensity, and emotion I had never reached before. It was as though by releasing my family's hold on me, I had unlocked a part of myself that had been waiting all along. A few months later, I submitted a series of paintings to a local exhibition. I didn't expect much, but to my surprise, they were accepted. The opening night was overwhelming, filled with strangers admiring canvases that carried pieces of my soul. Lucas stood beside me the whole time, introducing me proudly to people, as though I were already a success. One critic wrote a review calling my work raw, haunting, and unforgettable. I cried when I read it, not because of the praise but because someone outside of Lucas and Grandma Rose finally saw me for who I was. The exhibition led to more opportunities, and slowly, my career began to bloom. Each step forward felt like another nail in the coffin of the version of me my family had always tried to keep small. But then came the phone call that would test everything I had built. My mother's voice trembled on the other end of the line. She told me that my father had fallen ill and was in the hospital. Her words carried a weight I hadn't heard before, a desperation that almost sounded like need. For a long moment, I didn't know how to respond. A part of me ached with worry, but another part whispered that this was the same man who had looked through me my entire life. Lucas watched me silently as I hung up the phone, his expression calm but supportive. You don't owe them anything, Nora, he said gently. I nodded, but the decision wasn't that simple. I went to the hospital the next morning, not for them, but for myself. I needed to know that I could face them without breaking. When I walked into the sterile room, I saw my father lying pale against the sheets, my mother at his side, my brothers nearby. They all looked up at me, surprise flashing across their faces. My mom stood quickly and reached for Me. Oh, thank God you're here, she whispered, her eyes shining with something that almost resembled love. But I knew better. It wasn't me she wanted. It was what I could provide. The image of a dutiful daughter who had come running back. My father managed a weak smile, but it wasn't the kind of smile I had longed for as a child. It was gratitude mixed with relief, as though my presence was another box checked on a list. Thomas and Mason nodded at me, their faces strangely subdued, but I could see the calculation in their eyes. They were already wondering what this would mean, how they could spin it, how it might add to their advantage. For the first time in my life, I wasn't intimidated by them. I wasn't a scared little girl anymore. I was a woman who had built a life of her own, a woman who no longer needed their approval. I sat down beside my father and spoke softly. I hope you recover, Dad, I said, and I meant it, but that was all. There was no outpouring of love, no desperate plea for him to notice me. I had made peace with the fact that he never truly would. The silence that followed was heavy, but it didn't crush me like it once would have. After a few minutes, I stood and told my mother that I had to leave. Her face fell, and she whispered, "But we need you, Nora. Please stay." Her words stung because they sounded so unfamiliar, but I knew they weren't born from genuine love. They were born from convenience, from fear, from a lifetime of treating me as less until they finally realized I was stronger without them. I walked out of that hospital room feeling lighter than I had in years. I realized then that revenge didn't always mean destruction. Sometimes the sweetest revenge was living fully, thriving in spite of those who had tried to diminish you. By choosing myself, I had already won. In the weeks that followed, I continued to grow my career. I was invited to contribute to an international project restoring historic murals, something I had dreamed of since college. Lucas celebrated with me, spinning me around the apartment as we laughed and held onto each other. He reminded me daily that I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was living. My family reached out a few more times, but each message felt hollow, transactional, as though they still couldn't see me beyond what they wanted. I stopped answering. It wasn't out of cruelty, but out of self-preservation. I had finally drawn the line between their world and mine, and I wasn't going back. Grandma Rose passed away not long after, and losing her was one of the hardest things I had ever faced. She had been the only true family I had within that bloodline, the one person who had believed in me unconditionally. At her funeral, I stood apart from my parents and brothers, feeling both alone and connected to her spirit at the same time. I whispered a promise at her graveside, promising her that I would keep living boldly, that I would honor her love by never letting myself be small again. Today, when I look back at the girl who once begged for scraps of affection, I hardly recognize her. I am no longer the black sheep because I've created my own flock. My family is Lucas, my art, the people who see me and value me for who I truly am. The scars from my childhood will never fully fade, but they no longer define me. My revenge wasn't loud or dramatic. It wasn't a grand confrontation or a moment of triumph in front of my parents and brothers. My revenge was quieter, stronger, and infinitely more lasting. It was choosing joy over bitterness, choosing love over resentment, choosing myself over their cruelty, and in the end, that choice was more powerful than any apology they could have ever given me. I didn't need their approval to shine. I never had. And finally, I believed it.